In the blistering heat of southwestern Africa, where the desert winds carve scars into the earth and the horizon trembles under the sun, a storm was rising, one that would become one of the darkest chapters of colonial brutality. This is the story of the Herero Wars, a conflict that began in 1904 and spiraled into a tragedy so immense that historians would later call it one of the first genocides of the 20th century. But to truly understand this war, you have to step back into German Southwest Africa, modern-day Namibia, where an empire hungry for power met a people desperate to preserve their land, their cattle, and their very identity. When German colonizers arrived in the late 19th century, they saw the vast lands of the Herero and Nama people as a treasure waiting to be claimed. For the Herero, cattle were life itself, wealth, status, pride, everything intertwined into the harmony of their culture. But to the Germans, these lands were simply an opportunity for farms, railroads, and expansion. Little by little, the settlers took more territory, cheating Herero families out of their cattle, seizing their wells, and forcing them into debt and dependency. Treaties were manipulated, promises were broken, and humiliation grew like a fire smoldering underground. For years, resentment simmered quiet, controlled, but building toward an inevitable spark. That spark came in January 1904, under the leadership of Samuel Maharero, a man of intelligence, strategy, and deep cultural pride. The Herero finally said enough. Maharero knew the power imbalance was immense. The German army was disciplined and well-armed, while the Herero relied on courage and determination. But he also believed that no people should be pushed so far that resistance becomes a necessity for survival. And so, with letters secretly sent to neighboring chiefs, alliances formed in shadows, and warriors preparing quietly, the rebellion began. Across German outposts and settlements, Herero fighters struck swiftly. Railway lines were torn up, farms were reclaimed, and soldiers were ambushed with precision. Maharero gave strict orders. Women, children, and missionaries were not to be harmed. This was not chaos. It was a desperate stand for dignity. For a moment, it seemed as if the Herero might succeed in reclaiming their place. The German administration was shocked, humiliated, and terrified of losing control. But soon, Berlin sent a man whose name would become synonymous with cruelty: General Lothar von Trotha. Von Trotha arrived with thousands of reinforcements and a mindset forged in earlier colonial wars. He believed in crushing resistance with overwhelming brutality. To him, the Herero were not people defending their home, they were obstacles to be removed. He made no secret of it. His orders were explicit, merciless, and horrifying. The decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Waterberg in August 1904. The Herero, with their families, cattle, and possessions, gathered on the plateau, hoping to negotiate or escape eastward. But von Trotha had no intention of allowing either. As dawn broke over Waterberg, German artillery thundered, machine guns tearing through the defenses. The Herero, outgunned, outnumbered, and surrounded, broke into a desperate retreat toward the Omahig Desert. Von Trotha anticipated this. He deployed troops in a wide semicircle, driving the Herero into the desert, a calculated trap. Once they were pushed into the vast wasteland, German forces poisoned wells, guarded water sources, and blocked escape routes. For the Herero people, the desert became a graveyard. Thousands perished from thirst and starvation, their bodies claimed by the scorching sands. Then came the document that made von Trotha infamous. He issued the extermination order, declaring that any Herero, armed or unarmed, man, woman, or child, found within German territory would be shot. No mercy, no negotiations, no exceptions. It was a statement designed to annihilate an entire people. The world would later recoil in horror, but in 1904 there was little anyone could do. The Herero were being hunted, scattered, broken apart. Samuel Maharero himself managed to escape with a small band, crossing the desert into Bechuanaland, where he was granted refuge. But for the thousands still trapped, survival was nearly impossible. The desert took lives silently, brutally, without pause. Some estimates say up to 80% of the Herero population died during these years, men collapsing beside the bodies of their cattle mothers, holding children who could no longer cry, warriors who once stood proud now reduced to skeletons wandering in hopeless search of water. By 1905, the Herero Rebellion had been crushed, but the cruelty did not end. Those who surrendered or were captured were sent to concentration camps, some of the earliest of their kind. In places like Shark Island, prisoners were forced into slave labor, starved, beaten, and worked to death under impossible conditions. The camps were not designed for rehabilitation. They were engineered for elimination. Disease, overwork, and malnutrition claimed thousands more. German scientists arrived to conduct grotesque racial studies, turning human suffering into cold experimentation. At the same time, another resistance rose, the Nama people under their leader, Hendrik Witbooi. Just like the Herero, the Nama had watched their land shrink, their freedom vanish, and their future darken. Witbooi, a skilled tactician and deeply principled leader, launched a guerrilla campaign against the Germans. For years, the Nama fought with clever hit-and-run tactics, using their knowledge of the terrain to evade capture. They were fierce, determined, and unwilling to surrender their birthright. But the Germans applied the same brutal methods: executions, deportations, forced labor, and the destruction of villages. By 1908, after immense suffering, the wars came to an end. The Herero and Nama resistance had been crushed, not by victory on the battlefield, but by starvation, imprisonment, and relentless violence. Entire communities vanished. Generations of culture were wiped away. The cattle herds that once symbolized life were seized or destroyed. The survivors carried memories that could never be erased, of loved ones lost in the desert, of chains and camps, of a world stolen from them piece by piece. Years later, the truth of what happened in German Southwest Africa began to emerge in historical records, diaries, military orders, and survivor testimonies. Scholars pieced together the timeline and realized this was not just a colonial conflict. It was systematic extermination. A genocide long before the world even fully understood the meaning of that word. Long before the horrors of the mid-20th century shocked humanity, the blueprint had already been drawn in the deserts of Namibia. The legacy of the Herero Wars is not simply a story of destruction, it is also a story of survival. Against all odds, the Herero and Nama people endured. Their descendants today preserve their traditions, languages, and memories with pride and resilience. They honor the heroes who refused to bow, the families who walked through fire, and the ancestors who kept their identity alive despite unimaginable suffering. And, in recent years, the world has finally begun to acknowledge what happened. Calls for apology, reparations, and recognition have grown louder. Germany has taken small, imperfect steps toward admitting the crimes committed during this dark chapter. But the true weight of history remains heavy. The sand of the Omahik Desert still hides the footprints of the fallen. The wind still whispers the names of those who vanished beneath the sun. And the ruins of old concentration campsites stand as grim reminders of the cruelty that once unfolded there. The Herero Wars were not just a clash of arms. They were a brutal example of what happens when greed overpowers humanity, when empire blinds itself to justice, and when people are dehumanized to the point where their lives no longer matter to those in power. As you watch this story unfold, remember that history is not distant. Its echoes shape our world today. The Herero and Nama Wars teach us the cost of silence, the danger of unchecked authority, and the strength of those who refuse to be erased. They remind us that every voice matters, every culture deserves respect, and every injustice, no matter how long buried, deserves to be brought into the light. The story of 1904 to 1908 is not just a tale of war. It is a testimony, a warning, and a memorial to the countless souls who walked into the desert and never returned. Their memory lives on not in monuments or books alone, but in the resilience of their descendants and in the courage of those who continue to demand justice today. And as long as their story is told, they will never be forgotten.